Yo, what is going on, guys? Jerome here, and today we're talking about the items you need to get right now that are going to be BiS or pre-BiS in the next phase. With Phase 2 coming on February 8th, it is very important that we get the right items now so we don't waste time later. You don't want to be one of those guys going back to BFD months later to get an item everybody else already has. I'm sure you know by now that Phase 2 comes with a new Nomergon raid, new dungeons, new quests, new rewards. And yes, some of this gear is going to be replaced very quickly, but not all of it. In fact, some of the pieces you can get right now will still be pre-BiS or true BiS in Phase 2. That is why it is absolutely crucial that you plan and prioritize gear right now so you don't fall behind. So let's talk about all the gear you need to prioritize for Phase 2, starting with weapons. From my research, there are two major weapons you'll be keeping around heading into Nomergon. Unfortunately, neither of them are Deadly Strike of the Hydra, since it has several quest reward options that are immediately better. For example, there are weapons like the Excalibur or just the Nightblade. It's not a one-hander either, since you have really good options like the Scourge Blade or the incredibly expensive Gut Ripper. The actual first weapon to keep around is the Ashari Arbalist. There are some similar bows available like the Outrider's Bow from Warsong or the expensive Bow of Searing Arrows. Realistically though, going into Nomergon with the Epic Crossbow is going to be very similar DPS. Plus, there most likely won't be another epic crossbow in the raid. The other weapon you'll most certainly be keeping going into Nomergon is the Rod of the Ancient Sleepwalker. This is arguably the most overtuned weapon in the entire Phase 1, and it maintains pre-BiS dominance going into Nomergon. Moving into armor, let's start with the next slot. One place that Blizzard really overtuned gear was in that next slot. Necklaces like the Black Shroud Choker or the Jagged Bone Necklace or the High Tide Choker are still very much pre-BiS. Even the spectral necklaces on the auction house are still easily going to hold their own entering Nomergon. As for helmets, the Spell Power Goggles Extreme outshine anything from a pure damage perspective. But every caster can keep their Rakamar's Tattered Thinking Cap or their Invoker's Shawl going into Nomergon without too much of a difference. Physical damage dealers still have their two cowl options, which are better than pretty much anything else out there. The other piece of armor you'll definitely be holding onto for your pre-BiS is your Epic Craft. The hit rating and the on-use effect are just too good to pass up, even though there are plenty of good pre-BiS options like the True Silver Gauntlets from Blacksmithing. Moving into rings, casters will be happy to know the Signet of the Twilight Lord is still very close to pre-BiS. It's important to understand that if you have Warsong Honored Rep, there is a level 28 ring and a 38 ring available next phase that are both pre-BiS. The same applies to physical damage dealers. There is one ring that holds up, which is the Thunderbrow ring for classes like Warrior. Technically though, that doesn't matter if you have Honored Warsong Rep. You'll just be able to purchase 2 Legionnaires bands from the vendor to have pre-BiS rings in just 3 seconds. Speaking of saving time, the trinket slot is another place you really won't have to make many adjustments going into Nomergon. Sure, you could just grab yourself a week 1 Arena Grandmaster, but for any DPS or a healer, your Void Pearl's definitely going to be equipped going in the Nomergon phase. Speaking of Nomergon, there are rumors abound about the Gnomish Universal Remote Trinket being very strong for taking over mechanical units. There's also the Minor Recombobulator, which will still situationally be used for speedruns and for PvP too throughout the phase. So we know which items are going to be pre-BiS. Let's talk about actually locking those items in and getting them as quickly as we can. Right now, the first place to be checking for those old Phase 1 items that are still pre-BiS in Phase 2 is on the auction house. You've also got to start stacking your BFD runs to ensure you get all the gear you want. This is where the top guilds are doing split runs, which means they no longer have to compete on gear. Hard-resing the staff is definitely a hard sell, but I would say you could stack the raid so there aren't 6 casters that all don't have the staff in the same place. On top of raids, Warsong Rep is another key, and I hate to say it, but it's pretty much mandatory for all the serious players. Honored gets you the 2 pre-BiS rings for casters or for physical damage dealers. Then Exalted gives you a new pair of epic bracers that'll be really hard to replace even once you enter the raid. So you might be wondering, why is it so important we get these pieces right now instead of waiting until later? The key is that the pre-BiS pieces like the Void Pearl or even the Warsong Rep are going to be much harder next phase. While in the looking for group channel right now, you can easily join a BFD in a matter of minutes. However, come February 8th, most people won't even be running BFD anymore. And while you could easily find a Warsong pre-made right now, most people are going to be spamming AB for Defiler Rep next phase. So we've talked pre-BiS, let's talk about the Phase 1 items that are true BiS in the next phase. The first thing you'll be keeping throughout Phase 2 is your Void Pearl Trinket. There may well be stronger activatable trinkets that are added, but having something to swap back to with damage is going to be really hard to replace. Speaking of swaps, you're likely not going to be keeping your Epic Craft on all the time in Phase 2. But as a flag runner, I'll always be using my crafted Void Boots as a swap when running the flag, and you'll definitely want to use the 10% glove swap at least a couple times in the raid. Another item that is very unlikely to be replaced next phase will be the Rod of the Ancient Sleepwalker. Unless Blizzard just completely overtunes casters, this is still going to be the BiS weapon. And then basing things off of the last phase, this is technically something you already could have, which is the level 38 PvP necklace. You'll be able to buy this the second you hit level 38, and it'll be BiS the whole phase or very close to it. And if you're exalted with the Warsong Outriders, at level 40 you'll be able to immediately pick up an epic pair of bracers. Those bracers are extremely likely to be BiS the entirety of the phase. A fun item that'll be BiS next phase is the 10% swim speed ring. That'll of course have very high value next phase for fishing wars. So one other thing that I wanted to cover now that you know the BiS items from phase 1 that still are valuable next phase is this comment from Green Surfer about BFD loot being very frustrating. You can end up with several of the same item throughout a raid while other items are still extremely rare. I'm curious if there are any items from BFD that have escaped your grasp every single lockout, something that you really need for Phase 2 that you just haven't gotten yet. Getting those pre-BiS items right now is going to save you a huge amount of time later. You want to be able to dominate the Nomergon raid and Arathi Basin, and you don't want to have to go back to BFD week after week. I highly recommend going on 60 upgrades, making a BiS list at level 40, and working towards all those key items. And while you're doing that, I'm going to keep putting out the best quality Phase 2 prep videos I can. It would really help me out if you liked this video and shared it with anybody that needs Phase 2 prep. And of course, if you subscribe so you can get all this info as early as possible. I'm so excited for Phase 2 that I actually went back and did a bunch of Phase 1 gold farms just to get as prepped as possible. Check that video out next to know which farms are worth your time and which ones are just a waste of time.